So in Chapter 14, we're going to take a look at the April Gallup lawsuit. This is one of the highlighted areas for which there's been a lot of dispute, and a lot of people have hardened their opinions based on what was said by April Gallup, or alleged to be said by April Gallup. So we're going to take a look at it in some detail. We have our table of contents. If you want to jump to another section, feel free to. Go to the slide numbers shown on the right. And this is for chapters 9 through 17. The April Gallup lawsuit exemplifies the poor quality research about the Pentagon. The lawsuit claimed there was no plane at the Pentagon, asserted the damage was caused by a missile and/or explosives, asserted that April Gallup walked out of the impact hole in the Pentagon, and no supporting evidence was presented. The claim that April Gallup walked out of the impact hole, because it was included in the legal complaint, has been cited as proof of no plane. The room where April Gallup was located, 1E517, is absent in the 9/11 literature. We don't really know where it is. There is a vague, it was in this area description, but that's about it. Gallup's legal team provided no supporting deposition or even a suggested path regarding travel to the impact. Room 1E517 is highlighted in the middle, and I've just drawn in a path to the entrance hole where she would be going out of the damaged office area, down the hall, into the fire, into the breach, traveling through this area and coming out the hole. It seems really implausible and doesn't jive with anything that's been described contemporaneously with the 9/11. Here's the entrance hole about 3 minutes after impact. Now, it's a massive inferno. Here's another photo of it a little bit later. You can see that the fires are raging, that the tree branches are in the way. To have walked out of the Pentagon through this area would have been a far more interesting story than what April Gallup says. It would be fighting through the fire and flames and the burning trees and having walked into this firing thing from down the hallway. And if you take a look through the window, actually, like the second one from the right, you can actually see the fires on the inside in this office. Seems highly unlikely that anyone would go and walk out this particular hole. Here's the entrance hole minutes after the impact taken by Steve Riskus. It's all aflame. So here's what the lawsuit complaint is. April Gallup versus Cheney et al. This is just the initial filing. The complaint, paragraph 2, claims to cause and arrange for high explosive charges to be detonated inside the Pentagon and or a missile of some sort to be fired at the building at or about the time the wayward airliner supposedly arrived there, to give the false impression that hijackers had crashed the plane into the building, as had apparently happened in New York. In paragraph 4, in the attack on the Pentagon, in particular, plaintiff avers that the official story that a hijacked plane crashed into the Pentagon and exploded, causing the plaintiff's injuries, is false. In fact, the bombing was accomplished another way, so as to limit the damage, protect the defendants, and only make it appear that a plane had crashed into the building. Paragraph 6. Her desk was roughly 40 feet from the point where the plane allegedly hit the outside wall. As she sat down to work, there was an explosion. Then another. Walls collapsed and the ceiling fell in. Hit in the head, she was able to grab the baby and make her way towards the daylight showing through the blasted opening in the outside wall. There was no airplane wreckage and no burning airplane fuel anywhere, only rubble and dust. So the disposition of the lawsuit. The attorneys ultimately were sanctioned for filing a factually unsupported case. Gallup's attorneys were saved from ridicule because one of the judges in the appeals panel, Judge John Walker, was a cousin of George Herbert Walker Bush. Failure of their appeal was blamed on nepotism and not the lack of solid preparation for the case. So in the decision, Gallup versus Cheney, 1241 CV, the decision. Indeed, in attempting to marshal a series of unsubstantiated and inconsistent allegations, note that, in order to explain why American Airlines Flight 77 did not crash into the Pentagon, the complaint utterly fails to set forth a consistent, much less plausible, theory for what actually happened that morning in Arlington, Virginia. We just saw there was no way the April Gallup could have gone through and come out the massively burning area of the Pentagon. Furthermore, and notwithstanding the unsupported assumptions regarding the fate of American Airlines Flight 77, the complaint also fails to plausibly allege the existence of a conspiracy among the defendants. Although, like the district court, we do not reach the question of whether judicial estoppel bars Gallup's complaint, we note that in the complaint, it's factually irreconcilable with factual allegations made by Gallup in other actions. So in other actions, she said that that a plane had impacted it, and now she's saying there isn't, but there's been no evidence presented in this case as to why she changed her opinion. I was actually in the courtroom when Bill Veal was defending himself, defending April Gallup in front of the three judges in the New Haven, Connecticut based courthouse. And when he was asked the question, didn't she make these other substantiated assertions that a plane did hit the Pentagon in the past, he looked like he had been kicked in the stomach. That was just the end of the game. I was just floored. I expected a much better response, but in fact, the case was ultimately dismissed, and later I find out that it was based on basically nothing. While Gallup's counsel asserted at oral arguments that Gallup's inconsistent claims could be explained by the emergence of new evidence since her previous submissions, he did not identify any. We therefore do not know whether Gallup's reconsideration of the events of September 11, 2001 is a product of new evidence or of new counsel. So what did April Gallup actually say? So several weeks after 9/11, about 5 weeks later, on October 31st, April Gallup is interviewed by the Center for Military History. And the interviewer asks, and we're going to go through this because it's a kind of an important piece of the April Gallup story. And this is what she said weeks afterwards. Interviewer: what happened that day? April: I talked to my first sergeant before she went to her meeting to let her know that I received my letter from my director. I sat down at the computer at 1 Echo 517, and as soon as I was about to turn the computer on, boom. Okay, there was such a great impact at the moment, I didn't even get to turn the computer on. The computer blew and everything changed. It went from light, pleasant environment to just total dismal darkness, flame and fire. It happened that fast. There was no, slow motion about it. It just happened so fast, When it hit, it was like everything crumbled. Walls, the computer blew, fire. It all happened instantaneously. And I wasn't covered all the way. I was just covered from my waist down, so I was able to move around to see what in the world had happened. Black. But you could see things in the fire that was in the back. You were able to see certain things, by the light of the fire because of the flame. But it was dark in there. Smoke, a lot of smoke, and the flames weren't so big, and you wouldn't have been able to really see very much except right in front of you. I took a deep breath first because I was like, whoa, what happened so fast? To go from a room that was light to something like that, you have to pinch yourself and say, oh my God, it's real. And then I had my son with me. So my newborn baby was with me. And so I was trying to maintain myself so I would not freak out. He was right next to me in a stroller. At first I didn't think he was okay because his stroller got caught on fire. So I thought when he was crying that he was crying because he was burning. That's what I thought. First I had to get myself together emotionally before I thought about, okay, what's my next step? Because I can't believe this happened. My son, but I calmed down and I was just thinking, okay, I need to do something. You know, I see over there that on that side that there's a stroller, and I'm like, my God, that's why he's crying. He wasn't next to me. He was blown. He was blown. It was like when the impact hit the stroller was blown in one area, and when I did finally find him, he was farther from the stroller on debris. But I thought he was in the stroller at first, and then when I turned to look back, I could see people from the ceiling. I could see people. I could hear people. A lady in fire. I could see different things when I looked to the back. I crawled out, got the stuff off from under me, and I crawled out, and I went to that stroller. That was the first thing because I thought he was crying because he was in the stroller. He wasn't in there, and I was like, oh my God, where's my son? Eventually I find my son in the debris. He's in a ball like that. But when I picked him up, he was laid out like that. So I was thinking, oh my God, his bones are broken. I was just thinking so many things, crying like, oh my God, I can't. And that's when we heard so-and-so. I was blacked out. Well, I didn't know exactly who it was at that particular time, but it was a male and a female saying, where are you all at? We found a way out. You could hear them talking, but I could hear bits and pieces because I thought for sure we were going to get burned up next. Because even though we were free from the debris, we didn't see a way. They made a little groove or a little way, and we got over it, and from so-and-so explained to me they found a way further out. So they helped us get out of our trapped area, and then they helped us get the way out. After that, they said, I passed out because I was just so glad to be out of there. I passed out with my baby. They said somebody helped. Somebody had my baby. I don't remember from the time we actually got right outside the building. I just remember coming to at the hospital wondering, where is my son? It's the first thing I could think of. So that's April Gallup's story as told to the Center for Military Intelligence. Cruz Cortez tells a story of April Gallup's baby. On the first floor of the earring in the darkness after the crash, Cruz Cortez awoke to the sound of a baby crying. A wall had collapsed, pinning her at her desk. She and her co-workers had been knocked unconscious. Her colleague, Specialist April Gallup, 30, had brought her 2-month-old son Elijah to the office so that she could enroll him at the Pentagon daycare center. Gallup also regained consciousness and saw her baby's stroller on fire, but Elisha had been thrown clear. In the room's smoke-filled darkness, Cruz Cortez sensed fire raging beyond the wall that had collapsed onto her. Another co-worker, Army Corporal Eduardo Brunapardo, 28, helped free her. They helped Gallup find her baby, who was not badly injured. These enlisted clerks and administrative assistants were not the kind of people who get window offices at the Pentagon, so they were in an interior office on the E-ring, searching for a way out through the smoke and dust. Everyone come toward me, Cruz Cortez heard Brunapardo yell. He had found a blown-out window in a demolished office across from what was left of the hall. About 100 people gathered at the window, or about 10 people gathered at the window and began jumping down. It was a 7-foot drop. Sergeant Christopher Brahman and April Gallup's baby. He recounts, and this is December 1st, 2001. As he ran towards the source, the first victim he encountered was a lady staggering away with a baby in her arms. I grabbed the baby and I realized the back of the baby's head was charred, so I ran to look for medical help, he recalled. He handed off the child to someone outside and returned to the burning area with Lieutenant Colonel Paul Anderson, who Sergeant Brahman said uttered a prayer before the two entered. He said, "Dear Lord, give me the strength," and we went in. So this diagram here shows probably the way that they got out was to go through a window probably about 3N, maybe 5N north. This is about behind where the fire truck would have been located. And these are the window areas. It's not clear which one of these that she would have gone out, but they would have had about a 7-foot drop. Blast-resistant windows are on the right-hand side of the doorway. That's wedge 1, and wedge 2 is on the left side, and you can see the difference in the way that the windows responded to the destruction. So let's talk a little bit about ground effect. We have our table of contents. If you want to jump to another section, feel free to. Go to the slide numbers shown on the right. And this is for chapters 9 through 17. In this section, we're going to be observing some wingtip vortices. Wingtip vortices extend behind an airborne aircraft. As shown in the image, higher pressure air under the wings creates a downwash, and then this higher pressure moves both downward and outward and then upward, and as it does that, it creates a rotation as shown by the cones. It takes energy to create these vortices, and so energy is absorbed from the system, from the plane moving by, from the engines, to create these vortices, and it has to be absorbed out of the engine's thrust. You can see these as the planes fly through clouds sometimes, and there's some pretty remarkable pictures of them. Here's one. Here's a test that was done with a crop duster going through a very colorful set of smoke, and you can see the wingtip vortices as it passes close to the ground. Here's an example of the wingtip vortices at some significant distance, and you'll see that it's going to create this circular energy. We actually saw one of these in a previous slide, something similar to this. Had there been a flyover above the Pentagon, and there would have been some evidence of it, that you would have seen some air motion as the air would have gone up and around as and creating these vortices, but none was observed. Ground effect. Some assert that a plane could not get low enough to hit the first floor due to ground effect. Ground effect doesn't prevent planes from approaching the ground. Typically, ground effect increases the air speed. To create the wingtip vortices, energy is expended from the jets and from the engines. More power from the engine thrust is then available once you get closer to the ground, and wingtip vortices are reduced. The energy to create them is reduced, thus increasing air speed, and that also increases lift. The effect of wingtip vortices is reduced at higher speeds. Also, compressing the wingtip vortices increases the effective wing surface, thus increasing lift. In this picture here, what we see is wingtip vortices being created on the left-hand side, more than half a wingspan above the ground. On the right-hand side, closer to the ground, you can see the wingtip vortices are being compressed, and so it takes a little bit less energy to increase them, and it also to create them, and it also increases the effective wing surface area. When you're getting close to the ground, this additional turbulence might kick up things like grass clippings and other dust things that would have been what Penny Eglis saw in her prior quote. The ground effect begins about a half wingspan above the ground. The plane approaching the Pentagon, however, was more than a half wingspan above the ground for much of its approach, until about the final 2,000 feet, or about 2.5 seconds. Adjusting control surface can compensate for the slight nose-down attitude to counteract the effect of the ground effect. And the plane approaching the Pentagon did have this downward trajectory, so it's quite likely that the ground effect was overcome by the plane's orientation. However, this does speak to questions about would a novice pilot be able to do this, and anecdotal evidence from other pilots that have attempted to do this in flight simulators. It has taken them many times to actually get it right, to be able to hit the the Pentagon at an appropriate location. Here's a topography map showing the route that we're looking at, and showing that the plane is above a half a wingspan until about the last 2,000 feet, and then seriously below that only for about maybe 1,200 feet. Boeing 720 crash test. The Boeing 720 crash test, there was a 4-engine transport jet. It was done at Edwards Air Force Base in California, remote controlled, crashed into a barren patch of nearby desert on December 1st, 1984. It was a controlled impact demonstration designed to underscore the results of exhaustive research into specific areas of aircraft safety, improved crash protection, and reduced post-crash fire hazard. The crash objectives were to obtain data on the impact forces, transmission of forces through the structure to the seats and the occupants, evaluate energy-absorbing seats, compare predictive structural behavior with an actual crash, and to test anti-misting kerosene fuel. So those were the objectives. The Boeing 720 crash test has some key observations for our 9/11 discussion. First, the plane approached the ground at a shallow angle. Ground effect did not prevent the plane from approaching the ground. Wing flaps were down, which increases ground effect. Still didn't save the plane from hitting the ground. Slower speed increases the ground effect. The plane descended smoothly below half wingspan, slid on the underside of the plane upon hitting the ground. Significant yaw rotation begins immediately when the left wing touches the ground. So we talked about yaw rotation as one side of the plane hit the diesel generator. Here you're going to see the impact of a less pronounced wing touching the ground and forcing the plane to rotate or to yaw. So here's a picture of the shallow angle approach above the flat surface. Plane altitude is about a half a wingspan above the flat surface now. Plane is less than a half wingspan above the flat surface, and it's not getting popped up. It doesn't push the port wing up to level the plane. If ground effect were a strong force, that becomes exponentially greater as the wing approaches the ground, and as some suggest, the port wing should not be able to drop lower than the starboard wing, absent a large force from the control surfaces. If the ground effect were such a strong effect closer to the Earth, the forces of the left wing would be so large in the upward direction under the left wing that a tilt near the Earth would be impossible, and would self-correct the plane to be flat, level. But the ground effect doesn't do that. It doesn't keep the plane level, and now what you see is one of the engines is starting to drag on the ground. It doesn't hit anything solid like a diesel generator trailer, and what the plane is actually rotating. So let's take a look at that yaw a little bit more. We'll mark the points in the steady frame here as to where the tail is. You can see it's moving, and so the location of the tail marker is showing rotation due to the wing impact. As you move from points 1, 2, and 3, the plane is not significantly rotating. Between 4 and 6, it takes 0.38 seconds. The left wing slides on the ground. Again, it didn't encounter a large immovable object, and the engine on the opposite side was not at full power. Okay, Chapter 16, Porter Goss and the Sonic Boom. We have our table of contents. If you want to jump to another section, feel free to. Go to the slide numbers shown on the right. And this is for chapters 9 through 17. Porter Goss gave a press conference, and a sonic boom was heard at the end of this press conference after he was taking some questions. Previously, the timing of the press conference was not exactly known. Now we have time-stamped newscasts that capture the boom and establish the time. This has been asserted by some to be an explosion. So there's the relevant videos. Porter Goss is at a press conference at the Capitol. We have Fox 5 News that captures the boom live at the Pentagon. CBS 9 describes the boom at both the Pentagon and the Washington Mall immediately afterwards. The timing of the boom, as heard on the video, is at 10:10 and 3 seconds, based on the time stamp of the sound in that live broadcast. About this time, rumors of another plane approaching Washington may have prompted a military jet or reconnaissance or something to happen where a plane took off and went fast. The Porter Goss press conference. Bob Graham, Porter Goss, and John Kyle were having breakfast at Capitol Hill with General Ahmed, the alleged money man behind the 9/11 hijackers, Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S., Melita Lodi, several members of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Evacuation notice was given about 9:48. After the evacuation, people are seen streaming out. Graham is recorded leaving, heads towards a press conference area with aides. The press conference is held outside. Don't want to be in the Capitol if it's going to be the target of a plane approaching. Porter Goss is recorded at the end of the press conference when he's answering questions, followed by a boom, and jet aircraft are heard overhead. The timing of the press conference, estimated timing 10 to 15 minutes to evacuate and walk to the assembly area, 10 minutes for a statement and question and answer. That puts the end of the press conference within a range of 20 to 25 minutes after evacuation. This implies a range between 10:08 and 10:13. A sonic boom is recorded at 10:10 and 3 seconds.
I can't take this. I'm going home. Senator Graham, have you been briefed? Do you know if you're getting a briefing of any type?
We will be later today.
Do you know what time?
Do your interview over there. Come on.
Okay. Let's go, guys.
Stay with me.
Stay with me. Just stay with me.
I would move farther away from the building we are right now. Do we have any? They said there's a plane heading this way. I don't want to be this close.
Have U.S. plans taken into account the use of the plane in a terrorist attack? And generally, what would the country do?
Well, I'm not going to tell you the specifics of that. The answer to your question is yes. We have considered that. This is not a new idea, and we have created some defenses against that. As you can tell, as we speak, there's still things going on, and I would definitely suggest that we be very alert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
I think it might be a good idea if we got out of this crowd.
Hey, John, Boyd. Did you hear that?
So, Fox 5 captures the boom live.
We do have Audrey Barnes back now on the phone. She has a view of the Pentagon. So, Audrey, there she is now. So, Audrey, tell us where you are and what you can see.
Okay, if you look over my shoulder, you can see the Pentagon.
And once again, on the left-hand side of your screen, you are looking at the Tower 2, the first one. This is all New York now.
Michael, if you can hear me, we just heard another explosion down at the Pentagon building. We just heard another loud explosion down at the Pentagon building just seconds ago.
That's our Audrey Barnes, who is standing nearby the Pentagon, saying they heard a second explosion. Audrey, did you see anything, since these other attacks have been aerial? Did you see anything flying overhead just before this explosion?
We can't see exactly where the source of the explosion was, but you could hear it very clearly with a loud boom. And I'm looking for another plume of smoke. I don't see anything right now. It might be still in that same general area where the fire is burning right now, but you can clearly hear another loud explosion. We just heard another explosion, and just from my vantage point, it did not appear to come exactly from the Pentagon, like perhaps a little bit across. So I can't tell you what it is. I'm still looking for a plume of smoke. I haven't seen anything new from this vantage point.
So, Audrey, you think that there's a possibility that the second sound that you just heard did not come from the point of impact or the Pentagon itself?
It didn't sound like it, but it was clearly a very loud explosion in this general area.
CBS 9's reports from both the Pentagon and the Washington Mall.
Let's go back to Dave, who is at the Pentagon site. Dave?
Hey, I just heard another explosion of some sort. Now, it could be a secondary explosion here from something happening, but we just heard a loud pop just as you were coming to me. It seemed to be on the east of here. I can't tell what it is. It might be something that's secondary to this because we had a number of small explosions after the fire occurred. Again, I can't tell you much more other than a loud pop just a few minutes ago that seemed a little bit different than the ones we heard earlier, which were on the outside here that could have been tires or something else.
Let's go to Frank Herzog, who is near one of the most visible monuments in the city, the Washington Monument. Frank, what do you see? What do you hear?
I'm on the west grounds of the Washington Monument. The area has been completely evacuated by Park Police, and I think I can answer Dave Statter's question about that secondary explosion.
Yes.
It wasn't an explosion. That was the sonic boom of jet fighters that were scrambled out of Andrews Air Force Base, we believe. They just circled the Washington area, flying from the east out to the west, and they were in a hurry, and they were high up in the air. So jet fighters, at least one, possibly two, were scrambled, probably as a precautionary measure. Needless to say, downtown Washington, D.C., except for the vehicular traffic, which is bumper to bumper, the rest of the city has been shut down. It looks like a Sunday morning here. The mall is absolutely empty. Park Police came through about 10 minutes ago, evacuated the entire area, and told tourists to go somewhere else. But I can tell you right now that at least one, if not two, jet fighters have been scrambled. They are patrolling the skies over Washington.
So the observations that we have from these three video clips. The boom in the three clips must be the same. It occurs in 10, 10, and 3 seconds. Cannot be a local explosions, corroborated to occur at the same time by Fox 5 and CBS 9. To be an explosion heard in both locations would require an absolutely enormous blast. The sound would have had a different character and an echo. Other accounts of the sonic boom are George Amon. I went outside and we were standing here watching down there, watching it burn. I'm watching the sky, and I hear two sonic booms, and I say, oh God, here they come. And then Major Craig Collier. While moving, we heard a sonic boom, and moments later an F-16 buzzed the Pentagon. We wondered if we were about to witness an American fighter shoot down a civilian passenger aircraft before our eyes. And these are the video sources which you can find either up on YouTube or in the various archive.org collections. The Citizen Investigation Team interviews are Chapter 17. We have our table of contents. If you want to jump to another section, feel free to. Go to the slide numbers shown on the right. And this is for chapters 9 through 17. The Citizen Investigation Team interviews were done by a small group of researchers, CIT. They interviewed witnesses to a plane at the Pentagon. They asserted to have proved that a large plane didn't do the damage. They claimed the angle, which would have been perpendicular to the Pentagon wall, couldn't have caused the internal damage path. So therefore, explosions must have been used to create the damage. The official story of a large plane impact was therefore bogus. That was their hypothesis. Later, CIT morphed their hypothesis into a flyover, no impact at all. It's amazing because many of the CIT interviews have unambiguous statements about a plane impact. We have William Legacy, Chadwick Brooks, George Amon saying, plane hit the building. Roosevelt Roberts is their flyover witness. However, a plane would have been miles away before Roberts could have gotten to the loading dock if the plane was going at any significant speed at all, because he stopped along the way to go do things according to his own recollections. He's the only one to have claimed that he saw a plane flying around South Park. They released their findings in interviews and polished videos. The context and completeness of the published interviews have been questioned. CIT has not provided unedited video for inspection. Requests for complete footage made over the years have been left unanswered. And as I'll just simply note, there is no FOIA process to compel CIT to release their raw footage. By comparison, the U.S. government has been more transparent than the CIT. So here's George Amman. George Amman was an ideal location for watching the Pentagon attack. He was safe from imminent personal danger. He had a clear, unobstructed view across the parking lots. He saw the plane approach. He saw the plane impact light poles. He described the plane impacting the Pentagon. The Center for Military History interview provided content-rich basis for CIT's documentary efforts, only focused on one small piece of it. The final CIT interview had no questions about light pole impacts, plane impacting the Pentagon wall, sound of the event. CIT seemed satisfied with Amman's ambiguous statement that he saw the plane over the parking lot. So I was looking out here, and I see this plane coming down here, and I thought it was coming, gonna hit this building. So then I'm seeing it. It's going by here, and it sounds like he's really stepped on the gas and just really poured the coals to it. And I go from here over to this one here, and I'm looking out, and you can see right over there where it's at, about 800 feet. And I'm just watching, and I'm amazed that it happened pretty quick too. And it hit the thing, and it was just the most god-awful loudest noise. I mean, you could hear it like in 3D. You know, I could see it. You could hear it, bam, and then you could hear it crumbling, crushing like an accordion, and then boom, just like a smash, crunch, pow, when all the fuel blew up. That's George Amman's statement. The interviewer says, when you first saw it from here to there, how long did it take? George Amman, from here to there, well, a matter of seconds. What I see, he was kind of turning and gliding when he come across here, across the parking lot, but when he got out right in front here, it looked like he poured the coals on. Yes, and that's when I looked over here, and then when I was looking over here, and I seen things fly up in there, not knowing really what the hell they were, but come to find out they were the streetlights. So the plane was clipping the tops of the streetlights off. CIT didn't ever get around to asking him about those statements. Lloyd England never says a 24-foot pole went through his windshield. In two CIT videos, Lloyd is never asked to show with his hands or other gestures how far the pole stuck out of the windshield. Half a dozen times, this would have been the next question, but then they'd cut to something else. If the question was asked, it wasn't included in the videos. He never points to the 20-foot pole and says, that's the one. Craig Ranke in the video is the one that says it. It's poor investigation techniques, is all I can say. So in the CIT's Eye of the Storm video, Craig says, the pictures are taken right after each other at the same time. It shows the pole. The most important point is that, here's your cab, right? Lloyd, that's not, pointing to the white car in the front. See your cab? See the grill? See you right here? You're wearing the cap. Yeah, I see it. Now, here is the pole. That's your pole. See the bend? Yeah. That's the pole you pulled out, right? Silence. There's your cab. It can't be any other pole. The lamp is down next to it.
Look at that one. I've never seen that picture there.
You never saw it? This is Jason Ingersoll. He was a Navy military photographer. Here's a couple more. There you are.
Yeah.
I know you've seen that one.
Uh-huh. See where the building is?
Yeah.
See where the hole is?
Yeah.
That is the picture.
No, yeah, but these pictures are taken right after each other at the same time. That shows the pole. The most important point is that here's your cab, right?
That's not.
See your cab? See it? Here's the grill. You see you right here. You're wearing the cap.
Yeah, I see it. I see it.
All right. Now there's the pole. That's your pole. See the bend?
Yeah.
That's the pole you pulled out, right? There's your cab. I mean, it couldn't be any other pole. The lamp is down next to it.
That's as close as anyone gets to hearing Lloyd say anything about what pole it is. Silence. Stunned, I would say, probably stunned silence. So here's a depiction of Lloyd's taxi with the pole. There's a doodle drawn by Lloyd England himself. And what we see is a pole sticking out of the car. It's impaled on the rear passenger seat, as we'd seen earlier in the Lloyd England section. The pole is sticking out, and it's got the little knob on the front, which is probably where the attachment was for the lower arm to the upper lamp support arm. That's probably what that is. And of course the depiction, the caricature of the entire mass through the windshield. The CIT challenge regarding Lloyd England. If there's another place in the CIT video series where Lloyd England clearly describes the 24-foot pole as the one that went through his windshield, this section of this presentation will be corrected. However, Lloyd's doodle fits the cab damage. The 10-foot lower lamp support arm seems to be the mechanism that could have created the small tear in the rear seat and stuck out the window. CIT interviewers, in my estimation, put words in Lloyd's mouth. Lloyd had silence to say. Chadwick Brooks. Chadwick Brooks is a witness to the plane impact into the Pentagon. 2 interviews were given, Library of Congress collection, CIT, probably others. The Library of Congress and CIT descriptions are contradictory on major points. The Library of Congress collection describes the plane that impacted the Pentagon. He says the plane flew over him, hit light poles, knocked them down like toothpicks, and he was close enough to have hit the plane with a rock.
A few seconds after that, I literally seen the plane just go nose dive into the Pentagon. Very awful fight, because at the very end, the plane literally just full throttle, and to this day, I don't know if I was able to watch it or not, but just to be frozen in time like that, to see that plane just literally clip the lamp hole. I guess just knowing that there were people on the plane at the time and just literally flying over me, what were they thinking? I know they had to see us, and just to literally go into the building like that, literally full speed. It was enough speed just to knock a lamp hole like it was just a toothpick, and just the sheer impact. To be frozen in time like that, to see that plane just literally clip the lamp hole. The closest that people were asking me how close it felt, almost if I had a rock, I felt like I could have hit it.
Were you able to literally actually see the plane impact the building?
Correct. From this location, where I'm standing now, we're able to turn around and watch the plane literally go into the Pentagon, which is currently located over there.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, and did you see it hit any light poles?
No, we didn't see it hit any light poles.
Okay.
But of course, the trees and everything else was kind of, blowing back and forth here, I guess because of the altitude of the plane and the velocity of the plane. Everything seemed to be kind of be blowing.
So he contradicts his Library of Congress interview. In both, he observes a plane impacting the Pentagon, but in the CIT version, no plane flew over him, no light poles were hit, and it was far away, nearly 2 football fields away. A plane at that distance would not have produced, or would have produced minimal wind, if any. There were no noticeable winds around the Pentagon on 9/11, and the comment about the trees moving and the winds blowing is supportive of a plane passing overhead. Somehow got through the editing process. Now we're going to start talking about William Lagasse. He was a police officer with the Pentagon police force. He was a witness to a plane impact into the Pentagon. He was refueling at the Citgo gas station. In the Citgo video, we see him standing at the northwesternmost gas pump on the station side of the gas pump. Seconds after the shadow was captured on the south side, Lagasse gets into the police car. He leaves by backing up, and he's gone within 20 seconds of the shadow passing by. So this puts a shadow passing at about the right time because it's just shortly because Lagasse leaves shortly afterward. In his Library of Congress interview, he says, on September 11th, the morning of the terrorist attacks, I was refueling my police cruiser at the Barracks K gas station, approximately 1/8 of a mile from the heliport side of the Pentagon. While I was refilling my tank, I was standing outside the vehicle. It was a really nice day. It was a beautiful blue sky.
On September 11th, the morning of the terrorist attack, I was refueling my police cruiser at the Barracks K gas station, approximately 1/8 of a mile from the heliport side of the Pentagon. While I was refilling my tank, I was standing outside the vehicle. It was a really nice day. It was beautiful blue sky. A American Airlines 757 flew approximately 100 feet above the ground level, maybe 60 feet in front of me. And that was probably, I'm trying to think here, give some estimate of speed. Was, at the time, I thought was probably 400 miles an hour, which was about right. The wind blast from the wing vortices knocked me into my vehicle. First thing I did was call our communications, and I merely stated an aircraft has just flown on the side of the building.
So just before the shadow appears, what we see is Sergeant Lagasse's vehicle is on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side I've circled where the shadow would be. Now we see the shadow captured on the video, and Lagasse is still over there. That would have been about 60, actually probably more than that, 150 feet away in front of him, I would guess, based on the shadow analysis that we've done. But it would have been that close and in this direction. So what we're looking at here is the Citgo video, and what we're going to be looking at is the plane passing in the left-hand side in the red oval, and while it passes through the red oval, what it's going to do is just kind of flash. It'll be about a second after I started. Then we're going to look in the right-hand side, and we're going to see Sergeant Lagasse leave on the right-hand side. He'll back up, and then we'll kind of that's enough. The lower part has been obscured for privacy reasons by the Department of Justice when they release this, so there's not a lot that you can see inside there. But let's go begin and watch the shadow. It should start right about now. There it is. So Sergeant Lagasse had a fair amount of correspondence with other people over the years. This is correspondence between Lagasse and Dick Eastman in 2003, June 24th actually, in which Lagasse says to Dick, the aircraft passed almost directly over the Naval Annex, splitting the distance between the Arlington National Cemetery and Columbia Pike, and was approximately 100 to 150 feet above ground level when it passed over the annex and continued on a shallow, fast descent, and it literally hit the building where it met the ground. There was no steep bank, but a shallow bank with a left rudder turn. So Lagasse's field of view from the Citgo station looking south, he would have seen the flight path. If you look to the bottom right-hand side, that would have given him a view to see the plane approaching over the naval annex, and then as it passed, he would behind the office area or the store area of the Citgo station, then it would have reemerged, and he could have seen it, impacting the building. In the CIT account, Strong suggests that he's actually looking south. Basically, I was here refueling my vehicle. I had my driver's side door open. He walks to the driver's side door. Well, I was actually standing here. I was standing by my door, had a lock on the fuel, had just let it go. I guess the tank was full. Had a working dog in the back, and I was talking to my working dog, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something and turned to look at it. So if the gas thing is just let go, chances are he's looking towards the car, towards the store, towards the south side of the Citgo station to see the plane come out of the corner of his eye, and as it comes across. So the observation is the opening statement that Lagasse has talking to his working dog in the car. He's almost certainly facing the car, not having his back towards the car, and he certainly wasn't looking towards the Arlington Cemetery, which is what he'll basically have to assert for the next part of this. In the CIT video, the plane location is inconsistent with him looking south. He's going to say that it was behind him. If he had been talking to his dog, if he had been the gas had just released, he'd be looking in this direction across the car to the south. But he's going to claim that it was behind him in the Arlington National Cemetery fence that back. The wingtip was probably about where the fence was at the boundary. Where what fence is? See the stone fence with the metal fence above it? That was probably as close this way as the plane got to me. Craig, let's see what fence you're talking about. And he zooms in. That would have been about the center line of the fuselage, right where that fence is. Craig, that is where the center line of the fuselage was? I would have to say it was on that angle. Drawing a line of the fuselage would have been there. I don't know where that would have put the wingtip, but the first thing I did was I kind of flinched and ducked into my car. At the time, I don't know if it was a reaction, a fear, or whatever. I ended up in my car because I called it in on my radio before I even left here. Not even seconds elapsed, and I called it in on the radio.
The wingtip was probably about, I want to say where that fence is, the boundary.
Where what fence is?
See the stone fence?
Oh, okay.
Metal fence above it. That's probably as close this way as the plane got to me.
Okay, let's see what fence he's talking about. He's talking about this fence way over here.
Yeah, that would have been about the center line of the fuselage, right where that fence is.
Lagasse's location at the northwest gas pump prevents his view to the west. If you take a look at the pumps, they have high sides on them. You would not be able to be looking to the west. You would only be able to see this if you were looking across the pump through the little openings above the gas pump and the top where it says Citgo. Lagasse's field of view from the Citgo station looking north, he would only have been able to see out in the direction that's highlighted in the purple. It's about 350 feet to the Arlington National Cemetery stone wall that he said that the plane was traveling along, and as close as it got to him. And it seems like if it's flying past him, he would not nearly wouldn't flinch quite as the way that he would, but that may be.
How sure are you that the plane was to the north, coming from the north side of the Navy Annex? You're saying it was pretty much between the Navy Annex and Arlington Cemetery? How certain are you of that?
100%. Bet my life on it. 100%. Bet my life on it.
Craig says, how sure are you that the plane was to the north of the Navy Annex? You said it was between the Navy Annex and Arlington Cemetery. How certain are you of that? 100%. I'd bet my life on it. The elevated sides of the gas pump restricts his view. He had to be facing toward, not away from, the Citgo store to have written this to Dick Eastman. Passed almost directly over the Navy Annex, splitting the distance between the Arlington National Cemetery and Columbia Pike. He had to be facing away from the Citgo store to have reported, "See the stone fence with the metal fence above it? It was probably as close this way as the plane got to me," which account is supportable. In the Washington Post on October 25th, 2001, Lagasse's October 2001 account doesn't sound like a plane 350 feet away traveling along the cemetery wall. Sergeant Lagasse was at the gas station near the Pentagon filling up his patrol car when he noticed a jet fly in low. Initially, he thought the plane was about to drop on top of him. It was that close. Robert Tercio. Robert Tercio was another CIT witness interviewed by the CIT about the same date as Lagasse and Brooks. Robert Tercio unambiguously contradicts the location given by Lagasse to CIT, supports Lagasse's south-facing observations, supports Lagasse's statement to Dick Eastman, supports Lagasse's Washington Post quote. The location of the plane is pointed to by Robert Tercio. The location of Robert Tercio was there, and he points towards the flight path above the canopy of the Citgo station.
Here we are on the north side of the Citgo station, the Navy Annex station, or whatever it's called. What's it called?
Navy Exchange.
Navy Exchange, right. Okay. And so now, you pretty much, this is exactly where you saw the plane fly by, right?
Yes.
Can you point for me how you saw it come?
Well, I would say it seems to be just over the canopy here, just over the corner of this canopy.
So, what we have is Robert Tercio pointing in the opposite direction from the part way towards where Lagasse said he was looking, and he's pointing in the opposite direction. It just doesn't make any sense. So was Lagasse playing games with D? Lagasse had interactions with Dick Eastman that show he was aware of the Pentagon controversy, had contempt for people disbelieving a large plane impacted at the Pentagon. In this email from June 24th, 2003, from Lagasse, "Dear Sir, rest assured that it was a Boeing 757 that flew into the Pentagon building that day. The fact that you are insinuating that this was staged and a fraud is unbelievable. You ask where the debris is. Well, it was in the building. I saw it everywhere. I swear to God, you people piss me off to no end. There usually isn't huge amounts of debris left. How much did you see from the World Trade Center? Are those fake aircraft flying into that building? I know that this will make no difference." And now we have the submission to the 9/11 consensus panel and their challenge. We'll be addressing the mechanism of destruction at the Pentagon on 9/11. The consensus panel initiated the challenge while addressing the controversy within the 9/11 truth community. This reply to the consensus panel challenge regarding the events at the Pentagon is hereby respectfully submitted. It is in response to, until there is an explanation that does justice to all the various types of evidence. In the opinions of the author and the peer reviewers, this extensive overview provides the requested explanation and does justice to the various types of evidence. This lecture answered the most controversial question, which is, what mechanism caused the damage at the Pentagon on 9/11? If you care enough to have an opinion about what happened at the Pentagon, you should care enough to know what the evidence is and what it shows. The conclusion is, a large plane impacted the Pentagon on 9/11 and created the damage that was observed. The evidence does not support any other hypothesis for the mechanism of damage. The focus for the next steps, in my opinion, should be on how this large plane could have approached the Pentagon unchallenged. If there are any questions, please feel free to submit them to me, waynecoste@gmail.com. We have one submission of a peer review comment that will be proceeding immediately after this.
In this section, I will discuss ground effects and whether these effects could prevent a Boeing 757-200 flying at 540 miles an hour, 10 feet above the ground, and impact the Pentagon. Some people believe that a Boeing 757 could not come close to the ground because the ground effects experienced by the plane would be so intense that the plane would be forced back skyward. I will show in the course of this presentation that ground effects cannot prevent a plane from reaching the ground, specifically because it was traveling so fast. Additionally, I will show that it isn't ground effects that would challenge a pilot in this instance, but rather the fact that the plane was being flown full throttle and far beyond maximum velocity Boeing recommends that a 757 should have been flown. Lastly, I will infer that it is highly unlikely that Hani Hanjour could have flown this plane and that we must consider other possibilities. There have been so many images of planes flying through thin clouds producing those dramatic downdrafts and vortices that we have come to believe that at high speed that these vortices and downdrafts would become much more intense, preventing a plane from flying near the ground. As we shall see during the course of this presentation, this just isn't the case. In order to understand why ground effects wouldn't prevent an airliner from flying near the ground at high speed, we will first need to understand several properties of flight. We will need to know what angle of attack is, what induced drag, parasite drag, and total drag is, what downwash is, and what the effect throttling the engine has on lift, and what happens when a plane is flown beyond the velocity never to be exceeded. Angle of attack is the angle that the wing makes with respect to the oncoming stream of air that the plane encounters as the plane flies forward. What is important for our discussion is that as a plane increases its speed, that angle of attack required to produce sufficient lift to keep the plane in level flight decreases. This is because the amount of lift just needs to equal the weight of the plane and no more to keep the plane level. As we can see from the diagram, lift is related to the angle of attack. We can also see from the formula for lift that lift is also proportional to the square of velocity, implying that as velocity doubles, lift increases by a multiple of 4. This means that the angle of attack only needs to be 1/4 of what it was at the lower velocity. This additionally means that as velocity increases, the angle of attack becomes closer to parallel to the oncoming airstream, meaning the airstream is bent downward at a smaller angle, creating a shallower downward flow of air beneath the plane. There are two parts to induced drag: the drag caused by the configuration of the wing, and the angle of attack that pushes against the oncoming stream of air as it diverts it downward in the process of producing lift, creating a drag force reducing the effective thrust of the engine. The second part is caused by some of the air from the underside of the wing spilling around the tips of the wing, producing the characteristic vortex, also reducing the effective thrust of the engines. It is these two properties of drag that causes ground effects when a plane is coming in for a landing. After a plane takes off from an airport and gains speed, however, the induced drag diminishes as the angle of attack becomes closer to parallel to the oncoming airstream at higher airspeeds. At sea level, since lift is 1.5 times greater than at 30,000 feet, an even smaller angle of attack is required to keep the plane in level flight. This means that an aircraft flying at 540 miles an hour would have to come very close to the ground, much closer than 1/2 wingspan rule for a plane landing at an airport. Parasite drag Parasite drag has no effect on ground effect. Parasite drag is caused by the friction between the outer skin of the aircraft and the oncoming air. At low speed, the friction, and thus the parasite drag, is very low, but at high speed, the parasite drag becomes much greater, and as the plane approaches Mach 0.8, the force of the parasite drag becomes nearly as great as the thrust of the engines, limiting how fast the plane can actually travel. Parasite drag is very important to the handling of the aircraft at low altitude and high speed, however, because air density is 3 times higher than at 30,000 feet, putting considerable more strain on the airframe, making it much more difficult for the pilot to execute a precision descent. Total drag. Total drag is just the sum of induced drag and parasite drag. As you can see by the chart on the right, as speed increases, induced drag approaches zero and parasite drag increases dramatically. Total drag starts out high at low speed because of the high induced drag at low speed, and reaches a minimum where induced drag and parasite drag equal each other, and then increases dramatically along with parasite drag as the speed continues to increase. What is important to note here is that at 540 miles per hour, induced drag that is responsible for a significant amount of the ground effect is nearly zero. Downwash. Downwash is what actually keeps the plane airborne. Downwash is a function of the angle of the wing with respect to the airstream, or angle of attack, and that pushes the airstream downward as it comes in contact with the wings. As the speed of the aircraft increases, the angle of the downwash decreases, reducing the height above the ground where ground effects come into play. When a plane is traveling 540 miles an hour at sea level, the angle of attack is so small that downwash only produces ground effects when the plane is very close to the ground, under 1/4 wingspan, not the 1/2 wingspan rule for planes coming in for a landing. There isn't a lot of discussion of this in the literature because there is no occasion where a plane would be flying 10 feet off the ground going 540 miles an hour or 100 miles per hour faster than Boeing recommends that the plane be flown at sea level. Effect of engine throttle on lift. With a constant angle of attack, when a pilot pushes forward on the throttles, increasing the thrust of the engines, the plane will tend to climb as the airspeed increases because the vertical component of the velocity of the air being directed downward also increases, increasing lift. Thus, a small angle of attack at high speed produces the same lift as a large angle of attack at low speed. On 9/11, the large commercial jet coming into the Pentagon was coming in at full throttle, meaning the lift of the plane was continually increasing until the jet impacted the Pentagon. This is important in understanding the difficulty of making a precision descent into the Pentagon. The aircraft operated far beyond VNE. The velocity never to be exceeded at 30,000 feet for a Boeing 757-200 is 660 miles per hour. The velocity never to be exceeded for a Boeing 757-200 at sea level is 414 miles per hour. A Boeing 757 can fly beyond the maximum speed Boeing recommends and can continue to increase in speed until the force of the parasite drag equals the thrust of the engine, arresting further increase in speed, or until the airframe begins to break apart. Pilots flying a 757-200 in flight simulators noticed that the indicators in the flight simulator showed that the control surfaces of the plane were beginning to flutter, indicating the plane was reaching its structural limits. This means that the 7500 This means that the 757-200 was so far out of operating limits when it came into the Pentagon that it would be exceedingly difficult for an amateur pilot to execute a precision descent into the facade of the Pentagon under these circumstances. It should be noted that the aircraft that hit the Pentagon, if it was a Boeing 757-200, was only flying outside of V&E for the last 34 seconds, meaning that the plane did not have a whole lot of time to experience structural failure. Ground effect when landing an aircraft. When an aircraft is coming in for a landing and its airspeed is low, the angle of attack must be high to maintain lift. This produces maximum induced drag and produces large wingtip vortices. Because of this, when the plane comes within one-half its wingspan from the ground, lift begins to increase dramatically because 1. The wingtip vortices are disrupted, increasing the effective thrust of the engines, and 2. Downwash begins impacting the ground, spreading out the downwash, producing an effect as though the surface of the wing increased, also increasing lift. Parasite drag is not affected by proximity to the ground, so it plays no part in ground effect. When pilots discuss ground effects, they are talking about ground effects when coming in for a landing at high angle of attack, producing large wingtip vortices and a downwash directed at a steeper angle toward the ground. They aren't talking about flying a plane beyond V&E at 540 miles an hour near the ground where induced drag would be near zero. Ground effects when flying 10 feet above the ground at high airspeed. When flying a plane at high speed near the ground, induced drag is negligible, and the angle of attack of the plane and the angle of the downwash with respect to the oncoming airstream is closer to the horizontal, implying that the aircraft would not feel ground effects until much closer to the ground than one-half wingspan rule when coming in for a landing. The only thing that comes into play when traveling at high speed near the ground is the downwash when it begins to encounter the ground, thus increasing lift, but this only occurs when the plane is much less than 1/4 of its wingspan from the ground. This may seem counterintuitive, but at high airspeed, the ground effects are actually considerably less than at low airspeed when coming in for a landing, meaning that the plane coming into the Pentagon at 540 miles per hour would be able to hit its target without ground effects significantly affecting its trajectory. Ground effects, putting it all together. The large commercial jet that came into the Pentagon was traveling at 540 miles an hour under full throttle for the last 34 seconds of its flight. It was one-half wingspan or less from the ground for the last 2,000 feet of travel into the Pentagon, and less than 1/4 of a wingspan from the ground for the last 814 feet of travel into the Pentagon. The total time that the aircraft coming into the Pentagon would have experienced ground effects at 540 miles an hour at sea level would only be around 1 second, hardly enough time to cause the aircraft to lift significantly considering the huge momentum of this plane. The much more significant problem for the pilot would be negotiating a precision descent into the first floor of the Pentagon while at full throttle, while accelerating to 540 miles an hour, 100 miles per hour beyond V&E for a 757-200 at sea level. Approaching plane was more than one-half wingspan above the ground. This slide shows the altitude of the plane that was coming into the Pentagon according to many sources. I think you can see from this graphic that the plane was around one-half of a wingspan from the ground for only the last 2,000 feet of travel to the Pentagon, and 1/4 of a wingspan from the ground for only the last 800 or so feet of travel to the Pentagon. Too short a distance for the plane to react significantly to any ground effect. Pilots' attempts on flight simulators. When seasoned pilots attempted this maneuver on 757 flight simulators, they had difficult to impossible times hitting the Pentagon. One 20-year veteran Air Force and commercial airline pilot had to attempt this maneuver 5 times on the flight simulator before being successful. On his 5th try, he initially set the angle of attack to a negative value of 1.5 degrees and then pushed forward on the throttle, which, because of the increased lift produced by the thrust of the engines, leveled the plane out at 10 feet above the ground and into the Pentagon. This is completely counterintuitive for the pilot because they never practiced flying a plane under these conditions. Interestingly, the value obtained from the angle of attack from a decoding of the alleged FDR for AA-77 by Warren Stutt indicated that the plane was coming in with an angle of attack of minus 1.15 degrees, very similar to what this pilot had to do on the flight simulator. Ground effects conclusion. Though it would be very difficult to fly a Boeing 757 into the Pentagon at 540 miles an hour, it would not be impossible, and seasoned pilots, after practicing this maneuver, were able to successfully execute crashing a 757 into the Pentagon on flight simulators. Ground effects would not have the same degree of influence that many of us had initially imagined, so ground effects can be ruled out as preventing a 757 from impacting the ground floor of the Pentagon. The fact that the aircraft was operating far outside VNE and accelerating all the way into the Pentagon would still make the aircraft very difficult to pilot even for seasoned pilots trained on 757s. For a pilot like Hani Hanjour to get lucky and execute this maneuver on his first try strains credulity. I conclude with the chart on the next slide, which asks you to think about whether it is more likely that a human pilot flew this plane into the Pentagon or whether it is more likely that a modern custom flight termination system flew this plane into the Pentagon. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation.
That's the end. Thank you very much.